A well-known capital stylist was found brutally murdered, and it happened in her own beauty salon. The lack of witnesses and concrete leads hindered law enforcement's investigation. The police hunted for the criminal for 4 months, and every time they found even the slightest lead, they would simply lose it again. In short, when the case had almost reached a dead end, it turned out that the seemingly elusive killer had still made a few mistakes. The case, as always, is gruesome and, as always, interesting, so if you can, make yourselves comfortable, dear ones. Because it's scary. On the morning of November 19th, 2015, one of the clients arrived at the studio of Kateryna Polozhai, located in the Shevchenkivsky district of Kyiv. It was a planned visit, and when the woman saw that the owner's car was parked near the salon, she decided that they were already waiting for her. However, at the entrance to the studio, the client was met with locked doors and shutters down on the windows. Then the lady decided to call Kateryna, but she didn't pick up the phone. Still not getting a response after several more calls, the woman dialed the number of the establishment's administrator. Soon after, she arrived and opened the studio with her own keys. When the women entered, they saw a blood-stained floor, and on it the body of 37-year-old Kateryna Polozhai, with signs of a violent death. Law enforcement officers were called to the scene. Among them was Detective Andrei Kyiv, who plays one of the key roles in the investigation of this case.
We saw scissors. This is some kind of maniac.
In addition to these 19 listed wounds, the forensic experts counted several more, already on the whole body. In total, there were more than 30 of them. It was established that the woman died 2-3 hours before she was found. The brutal way in which the stylist's life was taken, and the absence of signs of forced entry indicated that the killer likely had strong emotions toward the victim. So, a personal motive could not be ruled out in the case. The investigation also did not rule out the theory that a maniac or even a female maniac could have appeared in the capital. Moreover, the criminologists leaned toward the second option because, in their opinion, the nature of this murder was more characteristic of a woman. In particular, forensic experts came to this conclusion because of the chaotic blows and the unusual murder weapon. Although it was not found at the scene, law enforcement believed that Kateryna was killed using scissors. But the problem was not only the absence of the murder weapon, because the hairs attracted the investigators' attention, so they were collected and sent for DNA analysis. In addition to the large number of theories, the investigation of this case was also complicated by the fact that there were no surveillance cameras in the salon, and the people who lived nearby did not hear or see anything suspicious that day. Only a little useful information could be provided by the concierge of the building entrance, who was located next to the crime scene.
At 2011 I heard screams. It was the girl who found Katya screaming. I didn't know the deceased very well, but I can say one thing. In recent days, Katya was clearly going through a lot of trouble. She used to always be friendly and cheerful, but lately she started acting like she wasn't herself. When I saw her last, she seemed upset about something.
Information that some unpleasant events happened in Kateryna's life shortly before her death was also confirmed by her close friend. The woman said Kateryna rarely complained about life. However, from her behavior, it was noticeable that something was deeply troubling the stylist. Andrei Kyiv latched onto this testimony. He thought that if he learned more about the problems that were troubling Kateryna, he might find clues that would lead him to the killer. To get answers about the victim's life, he turned to her parents. Of course, the news about their daughter's death was a shock for them. It seemed that Kateryna didn't have any enemies at all. She was a very happy, cheerful woman who had many plans for the future. Kateryna was raising 2 children, but motherhood did not stand in the way of her successful career. She created her own, quite successful business. Her style studio was popular and brought in a good income. In addition, the stylist has repeatedly worked at beauty contests, was a guest on television shows, and her clients were often stars of Ukrainian show business. But if everything was so good, then why has Kateryna seemed so upset lately? The thing is that, 8 days before her death, the woman officially divorced the father of her children, with whom she had been in a relationship for about 10 years. As you can see, there was a lot of information about the case, and it was also very diverse. So, 8 days before her death, Kateryna Polozhai officially divorced the father of her children, with whom she had been in a relationship, I remind you, again. Yes, for about 10 years. She dated for a long time before making her relationship official, and it was only Kateryna's pregnancy that prompted this, not any plans. The doctors insisted that the woman give birth in the hospital because she had indications for a cesarean section. However, Mr. Rustam, who practiced Islam, forbade his wife to give birth in a medical facility. He argued this by saying that he did not want anyone to touch his wife or child. Friends said the man was very jealous of his wife. And according to them, although he seemed at first glance to be a person with modern views, let's say, in some moments he behaved just like a religious fanatic and closely watched over his wife. For instance, Rustam read Kateryna's private letters and frequently visited her salon, simply to observe. He did this due to his intense fear of betrayal, despite his wife giving him no reason for jealousy. Sometimes after his visits, friends would find Kateryna in tears. Well, another reason for conflicts in the family was money. You see, Rustam didn't have a steady job, so most of the financial matters fell on Kateryna's shoulders. Despite this, the woman remained unsatisfied, leading to frequent arguments between the couple. Over the years of living together, it seemed that Kateryna had learned to ignore the frequent scandals, groundless jealousy, and the lack of initiative in job searching on Rustam's part. She loved her husband and was ready to put up with his behavior. However, everything changed after her beloved raised his hand against her. Not much is known about this incident because, as I have already mentioned, Kateryna did not like to share details of her personal life. But as her friends and parents claim, on one occasion the woman did admit to them that the man attacked her and started to strangle her. She did not go into details, but after this incident she filed a report against Rustam with the police. But soon the thought that the father of her children would have problems with the law made Kateryna withdraw that report. Instead, the woman weighed all the pros and cons and decided to file for divorce. She packed her things, took the children, and moved to her parents' house. Such an action seriously angered Rustam, so the victim's relatives were sure that it was the husband who decided to take revenge on his ex-wife and brutally dealt with her. In short, after receiving such an ambiguous description of Rustam from the victim's relatives and friends, law enforcement decided to find out a bit more about him. And it turned out that Kateryna was actually worried that her husband would have problems with the police because of domestic violence. Because you see, he already had a criminal past even without that, and quite a significant one at that. In the early 1990s, Mr. Rustam served time behind bars for participating in an attempted group rape of a minor. Having gathered all the information about Kateryna's ex-husband, the police felt they had the perfect candidate for the role of the main suspect in the stylist's murder. Andriy Kychuk decided to question Rustam immediately. So he decided it was an accidental call, possibly misdialed. Andriy Kychuk immediately called the mobile operator, and he confirmed the information that Rustam had provided. Moreover, thanks to these calls, it was possible to establish that the man was actually at home at the time when he was answering Kateryna's calls. In addition, in the establishment where, according to Rustam, he was having coffee with a friend, there was a surveillance camera, and the footage from it also confirmed the man's story. That is, at the moment of the murder, he was not at the scene of the crime. In other words, the main suspect in the investigation had an alibi, but besides on his hands. Also, if Rustam was involved in the crime and fought with Kateryna, her DNA could have remained under his fingernails. In short, all this needed to be checked. However, the investigators faced a problem. The nails on Rustam's hands were cut to the root, so it was simply impossible to conduct the necessary analysis. The man in turn assured the law enforcement officers that he always does this kind of manicure, and there's nothing strange about that. He also tried to convince the police not to waste their time and to look for the real criminal. Rustam claimed that Kateryna's business is an environment with very strong competition, where people are capable of anything, even terrible things. He stated that it is worth checking the version according to which Kateryna could have been killed by some model client whom she was preparing for a beauty contest. Since the experts had grounds to believe that the murder was committed by a woman, the criminalists decided to check this lead. But they were in no hurry to release Rustam and placed him in a detention center. Mean secret that among the models who participate in beauty contests, there is indeed strong competition. Stories about glass being put in shoes or powder compacts by competitors sometimes really do happen, not just in movies. But Kateryna was not a contestant, she was a stylist. So, there was, in principle, no sense in harming her. Besides, the woman had worked at the contests 7 years ago. Law enforcement officers strongly doubted that any of the girls had planned and prepared revenge for such a long time. Regarding the long one, check out this video. There, a guy prepared his revenge for 15 years and then ended up killing the wrong person. In short, but when Andriy was one step closer to solving the case, it turned out that the kiosk seller did not have the video from the day the stylist was killed. And he doesn't have it because recently a man approached him and bought that video recording. I wonder who that could have been. When it seemed at that moment that the lead in the case was finally lost, the seller suddenly remembered that the person who paid for the recording first called him on his mobile phone. Thus, law enforcement officers obtained the suspect's phone number. It turned out that it was registered to a man named Alexander Kovarenko. The most interesting thing is that this man is a friend of Rustam Agaugli, and therefore he was probably acquainted with Kateryna Polozhai. Talked to his friend, and the latter told him that he did not kill Kateryna, and that at the time of the crime he was at home. At first, this story convinced Alexander of his friend's innocence. But just a few days later, the man learned information that shook his trust in Rustam.
I also discovered it, but it's simply commonplace. My wife started calling my godmother, her name is also Katya, and telling what happened, what Katya said. I said, yes, I saw Rustam. He was probably a bit in shock walking in the morning. And after that, my wife told me that Rustam was seen not far from the scene of the murder.
After finding out that his friend was seen near Kateryna's salon on the day of her murder, Alexander wanted to find out if it was true. He found out exactly where his godmother met with the man, and he went to that place. Nearby, he saw a kiosk with a camera and bought the footage from the seller. Already at home, after watching the video, the man realized that the camera had indeed captured Rustam. Alexander recognized him immediately. According to the man, after watching the video, he was about to go to the police, but law enforcement officers got ahead of him. But the video the man appeared in is not proof of murder, so it was still necessary to wait for the results of the examination. The hair was found on the victim's body. Meanwhile, the investigators decided not to tell the suspect about the video recording so as not to scare him. Instead, they decided to start reconstructing the likely course of events on the day of Kateryna's murder.
At about 7:45 he
Turned out that Rustam had been planning and preparing for this crime for a long time. His motive was jealousy and revenge for the divorce. He wanted money. Kateryna was a successful and well-off woman. The property, which included an apartment and a car, she acquired before her marriage to Rustam. She also had a house, while her husband did not work anywhere for a long time and lived at his wife's expense. After the divorce, he was supposed to be left with nothing, and this did not suit him. Then Rustam began looking for ways to get rich and quickly came to the conclusion that if he killed Kateryna, exactly these thoughts that pushed Rustam to commit the crime. But despite such confessions, already in court the man changed his testimony. He insisted that he loved and respected his wife, and that the law enforcement officers forced him to confess to her murder.
I love and
From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. He will not be able to leave the city or district where he lives without police permission, and he must check in at the station every Thursday. Well, when this term expires, the killer of Kateryna Polozhai will become a completely free man. That's the situation today. Take care of yourselves, your family, and loved ones. Thanks for watching. See you next time.